Robert Hayes had been driving long-haul trucks for 23 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the American highway system could throw at him. Blizzards in Wyoming, dust storms in Arizona, fog so thick in Oregon you couldn't see your own hood ornament. But nothing in those 2 decades prepared him for what happened on Route 50 through Nevada in June of 2022. Robert was hauling refrigerated pharmaceutical supplies from Salt Lake City to Sacramento, a route he'd driven hundreds of times. Route 50 through Nevada. They call it the loneliest road in America, and for good reason. Stretches of 70-80 miles without seeing another soul. Just sagebrush, distant mountains, and that endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the high desert. Robert liked it that way. Gave him time to think, to listen to audiobooks, to just exist without the constant pressure of traffic and schedules. He'd left Salt Lake around 10 in the morning, made good time through Utah, and crossed into Nevada just after 2. The weather was perfect, clear skies, temperature in the mid-70s, light wind. His rig was running smooth, the refrigeration unit humming along at exactly 38 degrees. Everything was dialed in. He planned to make it to Fallon by 8, grab dinner and some sleep, then finish the push to Sacramento in the morning. Around 5:30, somewhere between Ely and Austin, Robert noticed the mile marker. Mile 181. He made a mental note because his GPS was telling him he needed to refuel in about 40 miles, and there was a truck stop near Austin that had good coffee and clean restrooms. He settled back in his seat, adjusted his sunglasses against the lowering sun, and reached for his thermos. 20 minutes later, he passed mile marker 181 again. At first, Robert thought he'd misread it the first time. Easy to do when you're staring at the same desert landscape for hours. But he was certain, absolutely certain, that he'd seen that exact marker 20 minutes ago. He checked his GPS. It showed him moving forward, making progress toward Austin. The map showed him at mile 191, right where he should be. But the mile marker definitely said 181. Robert keyed his CB radio. Breaker 19, anyone out there on Route 50? Static, he tried again. This is Steady Eddie eastbound on 50. Anybody got ears on? More static, but that wasn't unusual. Sometimes you could go an hour without hearing another driver on this stretch. He drove on, watching the mile markers carefully now. 22, 23, 184, normal progression. He started to relax. Just a mistake, he told himself. Maybe the marker was wrong, or he'd been more tired than he thought and spaced out for a minute. Then, at what should have been mile marker 201, he saw it again. Mile 181, the exact same stretch of road. The same cluster of 3 Joshua trees on the north side. The same weathered billboard advertising a casino in Ely, 40 miles behind him. The same small pullout with the same rusted guardrail. Robert's hands tightened on the wheel. His GPS still showed him moving forward, the little blue arrow creeping along Route 50 toward Austin. But the mile markers told a different story. He was looping. Somehow, impossibly, he was driving the same 20-mile stretch of highway over and over. He pressed the accelerator, pushing his speed up to 75. The big Freightliner responded smoothly, eating up the miles. Robert stared at the landscape, looking for anything different, any variation. But it was all the same hills, the same curves, the same distant mountains that never seemed to get closer. 20 minutes later, mile marker 181. The sun was lower now, painting the desert in shades of orange and red. Robert pulled over at the same pullout he'd seen 3 times before. He climbed out of the cab, his legs shaky, and looked around. The air was still and warm, no wind, no sound except the ticking of his cooling engine and the hum of the refrigeration unit. He pulled out his phone. No signal, that was normal for this area. But when he tried to access his GPS app, it showed him at mile 181 on Route 50 exactly where the marker said. He opened Google Maps, same thing. He tried to call his dispatcher. The phone indicated it was calling, but no ring, no connection, just silence. Robert got back in the truck and started driving again. This time he counted every breath, every landmark, every mile marker. 181, 182, 183. The numbers climbed steadily. His GPS showed progress. Everything seemed normal except for the growing knot of dread in his stomach. At mile marker 195, he saw another vehicle, a silver sedan heading eastbound in the opposite lane. Robert flashed his lights, hoping to flag them down, but the car passed without slowing. He caught a glimpse of the driver, a woman with dark hair, and then she was gone. Mile 181, the fourth loop. The sun was setting now, and Robert realized with cold certainty that he was going to experience night on this endless stretch of road. He'd been driving for almost 3 hours in a 20-mile loop. His fuel gauge had barely moved. That should have been impossible given the distance the odometer claimed he'd traveled. The refrigeration unit was still running, still showing 38 degrees. He tried to break the pattern. At mile marker 185, he pulled a U-turn, heading east instead of west. The landscape slid by in reverse. Mile 184, 183, 182. When he reached 181, instead of continuing, the highway simply ended. Not a barricade or a construction sign, it just ended. The asphalt faded into dirt, and beyond that, nothing. Not desert, not landscape, just a gray void that hurt to look at. Robert reversed quickly, turned around, and headed west again. His heart was hammering. Sweat ran down his back despite the air conditioning. He keyed the CB again, his voice shaking. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Steady Eddie on Route 50. I need help. Something's wrong with the road. I'm stuck in some kind of loop. Can anyone hear me?" Static. Then faintly a voice. 20 minutes. Marker 181. Can't stop. Another trucker, Robert realized with horror. Someone else was caught in the same nightmare. "Hello? Can you hear me? How long have you been here?" Robert shouted into the CB. The voice came back, clearer this time. "Days. Can't tell anymore. Fuel doesn't run out. Can't sleep. Just driving and driving and..." The voice dissolved into static, then into what might have been sobbing. Night fell completely. Robert's headlights carved tunnels through the darkness. The highway unreeled before him in the familiar pattern. Mile 181, mile 182, mile 183. He'd stopped counting the loops. 5, 6. The clock on his dashboard said 7:42 p.m., but he'd been in this for hours and it should have been later. Time itself seemed broken here. At mile marker 188, somewhere in the middle of the loop, Robert saw something standing beside the road. At first, he thought it was a person, maybe someone else who'd gotten caught in this trap. He slowed down. His headlights illuminated a figure in dark clothing, motionless, facing the highway. As Robert approached, the figure turned to watch him. It had no face. Not like it was wearing a mask or had features obscured, it simply had no face. Smooth, blank, like an unfinished mannequin. But Robert could feel it watching him anyway. He accelerated past, his breath coming in short gasps. In his mirror, he could see the figure standing motionless, somehow still facing him despite the distance and angle being all wrong. The next loop, the figure was at mile marker 193. The loop after that, mile marker 186. It was getting closer to the beginning of the loop each time, and Robert understood with sick certainty that it was moving toward mile marker 181. On what Robert thought was the 12th loop, he'd lost count. Time had become meaningless. The figure was at mile marker 182. Just 1 mile into the loop, Robert could see it standing there in his headlights, that blank non-face turned toward him. As he passed, it raised one arm and pointed down the highway. Westward. The direction Robert was driving over and over in an endless cycle. Robert was crying now, gripping the wheel so hard his hands ached. He'd tried everything. He'd tried stopping and waiting. He'd tried driving slowly, driving fast, turning around. Nothing worked. The highway just looped and looped and looped. His fuel gauge stayed at 3/4. The clock advanced but irregularly, sometimes jumping forward, sometimes backward. His phone showed no passage of time at all, frozen at 5:47 p.m. The other voice on the CB came and went, sometimes coherent, sometimes just screaming or laughing. Robert tried to talk to them, tried to coordinate an escape, but communication was fragmentary at best. He learned the other driver's name was Marcus, and he'd been in the loop for what felt like weeks, but might have been months or years. Marcus wasn't sure anymore. Marcus wasn't sure of anything except the miles and the markers and the endless driving. Then, on a loop Robert couldn't number anymore, something changed. At mile marker 181, the figure was standing in the middle of the highway. Robert slammed on the brakes. The big truck shuddered and groaned, air brakes screaming. He stopped about 50 feet from the figure. It stood perfectly still, that terrible blank face pointed directly at him. Behind it, Robert could see something else, a shimmer in the air, like heat waves, but it was full night and cold now. The figure raised both arms, as if beckoning. Robert sat frozen, hands on the wheel, mind racing. This was it. Whatever this nightmare was, whatever had trapped him here, it was centered on that thing. He could feel it. Every instinct screamed at him to turn around, to try driving the loop backward again. Anything but approach that figure. But he was so tired of driving the same miles, seeing the same markers, being trapped in this impossible bubble of broken space and time. If this thing wanted him, he decided, let it have him. Better than driving until he lost his mind completely. Robert put the truck in gear and slowly, very slowly, began to move forward. The figure didn't move. The shimmer behind it intensified, revealing shapes that made no sense, angles that folded in on themselves, colors that had no names, something that might have been a road but extended in directions that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space. 20 feet away, 10 feet. Robert's headlights made the figure into a stark silhouette. He could see now that it wasn't exactly human-shaped. The proportions were wrong, the limbs too long, the stance too still to be natural. 5 feet away, the figure lowered its arms and stepped aside. Behind it, through that shimmer, Robert could see Route 50, the real Route 50. He could see mile marker 201, where he should have been hours ago. He could see the lights of Austin in the distance. Robert pressed the accelerator. The truck surged forward. There was a sensation like passing through thick water, a moment of complete disorientation where up and down lost meaning. And then, mile marker 201. The CB crackled to life with normal chatter. Westbound at Fallon. Anyone know if that fuel stop at Silver Springs is still open? His GPS showed Austin 12 miles ahead. His phone had signal again. The clock read 8:15 p.m. Robert pulled into the truck stop in Austin with shaking hands. He climbed out of the cab and looked back east, back at the dark highway he'd just escaped. Everything seemed normal. Traffic passed. The stars were bright overhead. He checked his phone. According to it, no time had passed at all. It was still 5:47 p.m. on June 14th, but his body told him he'd been driving for hours, and the psychological weight of what he'd experienced sat on him like a physical thing. Robert delivered his load to Sacramento the next morning. He filed his log showing a normal, uneventful trip. What else could he do? Who would believe him? But he never drove Route 50 in Nevada again. He took I-80 instead, even though it added hours to the trip. And sometimes, late at night, he still hears that voice on the CB. Marcus, the other driver. Marcus, who might still be there, driving that same 20-mile loop, watching the same mile markers tick by endlessly forever. Marcus, who didn't get an invitation to step through the shimmer. Robert doesn't know why the figure let him go. He doesn't know what that place was. A fold in space, a trap for travelers, something hungry that feeds on the endless repetition of motion without progress. He doesn't want to know, he just drives, takes his loads, and stays away from the loneliest road in America. Because some roads, Robert learned, are lonely for a reason. Story 2. The Phantom Weight. Catherine Morrison had 17 years behind the wheel of her Peterbilt, and she prided herself on knowing her truck better than most people knew their own homes. Every rattle, every quirk, every sound it made. She could feel variations in weight distribution, sense when cargo shifted even slightly. It was this sensitivity that saved her life more than once, catching an improperly secured load before it became a jackknife situation, feeling ice on the road before she could see it. So when she picked up the sealed container in Portland on September 9th, 2021, Catherine knew immediately that something was wrong. The manifest said 40,000 pounds of industrial machine parts, heading to a distribution center in Phoenix. The container was a standard 20-footer, already sealed when Catherine backed her truck up to receive it. The shipping company was one she'd worked with before. Legitimate, professional, no red flags. The paperwork was all in order. The seal number matched. Everything checked out. But when she pulled away from the loading dock, Catherine could feel it. The weight was wrong. Not too heavy or too light, just wrong. It shifted in a way that machine parts shouldn't shift. Machine parts, even improperly packed, had a certain character to their movement. Metal on metal, predictable physics. This was different. The weight seemed to move independently of the truck's motion, like something inside the container was adjusting its position consciously. Catherine pulled over 2 miles from the shipping facility and walked around her trailer. The seal was intact. The container looked normal, a bit weathered, rust at the corners, but nothing unusual. She pressed her ear against the metal side. Nothing. Just the faint ticking of metal cooling in the Portland drizzle. She got back in the cab and consulted her tablet. The route would take her down I-5 through Oregon and California, then across to Phoenix via I-10. 2 days of driving with a mandatory rest stop. Easy run, good pay. She decided to ignore her instincts. 17 years on the road had also taught her that paranoia could cost you money, and Catherine had a mortgage and a daughter in college. She drove. For the first 3 hours, everything seemed fine. The weight settled into a more normal pattern. Catherine started to relax, berating herself for being jumpy. Maybe the load had just been poorly secured and was finding its natural equilibrium. Happens all the time. Then somewhere south of Eugene, she felt it move, not a shift, a movement. Deliberate and purposeful. The weight redistributed from the front of the container toward the back, like something walking. Catherine's hands tightened on the wheel. She checked her mirrors. The trailer was tracking normally, no visible issues. But she could feel it. Something in that container was moving from front to back. She keyed her CB. Breaker 19, this is Red Kate southbound on I-5 near Eugene. Any of you drivers ever haul a load that moved on its own? A few moments of silence, then a gravelly voice responded. Red Kate, you talking about cargo shifting or something else? Something else, Catherine said. Feels like something walking around in my container. A different voice chimed in, younger, amused. Maybe you picked up a hitchhiker, Red Kate. Check for stowaways when you stop. Containers sealed, Catherine replied. And I've been watching. No one could have gotten in. The gravelly voice came back, more serious now. Where'd you pick up the load? Portland. Heading to Phoenix, a long pause. Then, what company? Catherine told him. Another pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, it had a strange quality to it. Careful, like someone walking through a verbal minefield. Red Kate, you might want to contact your dispatcher. Tell them the seal number, see if they can verify the load. Why? You know something? Just make the call. And maybe find a well-lit truck stop to spend the night, somewhere with lots of people around. The CB went silent. Catherine called her dispatcher. The call went to voicemail, not unusual for evening hours. She left a message with the seal number and asked for verification of the load. By the time she reached Medford, Oregon, it was getting dark. Catherine had been feeling the weight move periodically all afternoon. Sometimes front to back, sometimes side to side. Once, horrifyingly, it seemed to shift upward. Impossible given that the container was only 8 feet tall inside. But she felt it nonetheless, a displacement of weight toward the ceiling. She pulled into a large truck stop on the outskirts of Medford, parking under the bright lights near the main building. 24 other trucks were parked for the night. Catherine felt safer with people around. Though she couldn't have articulated exactly what she was afraid of, she did her walk-around inspection. The seal was still intact. She checked the seal number against her paperwork. Perfect match. The container looked completely normal, but when she stood near the back doors, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Breathing. Slow, rhythmic breathing, except it came from every point on the container simultaneously, not from inside, from the container itself. The metal was breathing. Catherine backed away quickly. Her rational mind insisted it was just the metal contracting as it cooled. But her 17 years of experience said otherwise. Metal doesn't contract like lungs. Metal doesn't have rhythm and pace like a living thing sleeping. She retreated to the truck stop diner, ordering coffee and a sandwich she didn't eat. She tried her dispatcher again, still voicemail. She tried the shipping company in Portland. After-hour service, leave a message. She tried the receiving facility in Phoenix. They'd never heard of the shipment. That's when Catherine knew she was in real trouble. She went back to her truck. The parking lot was quieter now. Several trucks having departed, others arrived. Her Peterbilt sat under the lights, the container behind it looking innocent and inanimate. Catherine climbed into the cab and locked the doors. She didn't plan to sleep, couldn't sleep, but exhaustion from 8 hours of driving caught up with her. Her eyes grew heavy. She woke to knocking, not on her door, on the inside of the container. Slow, deliberate knocks, like someone asking to be let out. Knock, knock, knock. A pause. Then again. Knock, knock, knock. Catherine sat frozen in her sleeper berth. The knocking continued, patient and persistent. She checked the time. 2:37 a.m. The truck stop was mostly dark now except for security lights. A few trucks idled nearby, their drivers asleep. The knocking stopped. Catherine strained to hear anything else. Silence. Then the breathing again, but faster now. And something else, a scraping sound, metal on metal, coming from inside the container. Her phone rang, making her jump. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello? Static. Then a voice, distant and distorted. Don't open it. What? Who is this? The container. Don't open it. Don't let anyone else open it. Drive it to the ocean and dump it or bury it or crash the truck. But don't open it. I don't understand. What's in there? We made a mistake. The seal should have been blue, not red. Red means it's active. We sealed the wrong one and now it's awake and it's hungry and it wants out. Who is this? What the hell are you talking about? You're not hauling machine parts. You're hauling containment. That container is special. Reinforced, blessed, warded, I don't even know all the details. But it's the only thing keeping what's inside from getting out. The shipping company, the manifest, the receiving facility. All fake. All cover. This was supposed to go to a deep storage site in Nevada, but something went wrong with the routing. Catherine's mind reeled. This is insane. I'm calling the police and they can't help you. Listen to me carefully. That thing in your container has been in there for 60 years. It's not human. It's not from here. Every few decades it has to be moved because it degrades the container from the inside. Spiritual corrosion. We were moving it to a new containment site, but you got the wrong one. You got the active container instead of the empty. I don't believe this. Look at the seal. Really look at it. Does the metal look normal to you? Catherine climbed out of the sleeper and grabbed her flashlight. She went outside, her breath fogging in the cold night air, and approached the container. She shined her light on the seal. At first it looked normal, just stamped metal and a serial number. Then she looked closer. The metal was moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the surface of the seal rippled like liquid, and the serial number was changing. Digits slowly cycling through different numbers as if the seal itself was trying to become something else. Catherine backed away, her heart pounding. She returned to the cab and grabbed her phone. I see it. What do I do? The ocean is too far. Nevada site is compromised, that's why we're moving it. Your best option is Crater Lake. Drive to Crater Lake, Oregon. There's a place there where the veil is thin. It can pass through, go somewhere else. Somewhere it can't hurt anyone. How do I? There will be people there. They'll meet you. They've been notified. Just drive. Don't stop except for fuel. Don't open the container. Don't let anyone else open it. And whatever you do, if it starts talking to you, don't listen. Talking?
It can. The line went dead. Catherine sat in her cab, shaking.
Part of her insisted this was a prank, a hallucination, stress-induced delusion, but she could feel the truth of it in her gut. That weight, that wrong weight, was something that shouldn't exist. She started the truck and pulled out of the parking lot, heading north. Crater Lake was about 3 hours away. She could make it by dawn. The first hour was quiet. Catherine pushed her speed to the limit, the big Peterbilt eating up the miles on empty night highways. She kept the CB on, listening to occasional chatter from other night shift drivers, the normal sound of it comforting. Then it spoke. Not through the CB or her phone. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, seeming to originate inside Catherine's own head. Catherine Morrison, 42 years old, daughter named Emma, house in Tacoma with a blue door. You owe $37,000 on your mortgage. Emma's tuition is $23,000 a year. Catherine gripped the wheel harder, forcing herself to focus on the road. I can help you with that. I can help you with everything. Just stop the truck. Open the container. Let me out and I'll make you rich. I'll make you powerful. I'll give you everything you've ever wanted. Shut up, Catherine whispered. I know you're afraid. You don't need to be. I'm not a monster. I'm just different. I've been in this box for 60 years, Catherine. 60 years in the dark, alone. All I want is to be free. Is that so terrible? You're lying, am I? Open the container and see. What's the worst that could happen? You'll find some machine parts and realize this whole thing was a paranoid delusion. Or you'll let out something that just wants to go home. Either way, you'll know the truth. The voice was seductive, reasonable. Catherine found herself actually considering it. What if this was all a mistake? What if there really were just machine parts back there and she was having some kind of breakdown? Then she felt the weight shift again, and this time it was violent. The entire trailer rocked. Something inside the container hit the walls with tremendous force, denting the metal from within. Catherine saw it in her mirrors, the sides of the container flexing outward, then snapping back. "Let me out!" The voice was no longer reasonable. It was rage and hunger and something alien that made Catherine's ears ring. "Let me out, let me out, let me out!" The container shook and bucked. Catherine struggled to keep the truck on the road. The thing inside was throwing itself against the walls, the ceiling, the floor. The container groaned and shrieked. A split appeared in the side panel, a thin line of darkness. Catherine pushed the accelerator to the floor. The engine roared. She was doing 80, 90 miles an hour on mountain roads, suicide speed for a fully loaded big rig, but she didn't care. Crater Lake. She had to get to Crater Lake. The voice was screaming now, words in languages that predated human speech, sounds that hurt to hear. The container was coming apart. Catherine could see more splits appearing in her mirrors, black lines spreading across the metal like cracks in ice. She took a turn too fast. The trailer swayed. For a horrible moment she thought it would jackknife, thought she'd lose control and crash and that thing would get free and it would be her fault, her failure. But the truck held. The tires bit. She came out of the turn and saw a sign. Crater Lake National Park, 15 miles. The container burst. Not completely, the reinforced frame held, but the sides blew out with a sound like a bomb going off. Catherine saw debris flying in her mirrors, chunks of metal spinning away into the darkness. And something else. Something that might have been smoke or shadow or a piece of night that had gained independent existence. It poured from the breaches in the container, flowing forward along the trailer toward the cab. Catherine could see it in her passenger mirror. A dark mass that moved against the wind, that had too many edges and not enough substance, that hurt to look at because her brain couldn't properly process what her eyes were seeing. It reached the cab. The passenger window frosted over instantly, ice forming in geometric patterns that were almost but not quite symmetrical. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in seconds. Catherine's breath came out in clouds, a shape pressed against the passenger window from outside. It might have been a hand. It might have been a face. It was impossible to tell because it kept changing, flowing, becoming different configurations of darkness. Catherine. The voice was inside the cab now, inside her head, behind her eyes. "You can't escape me. I'm already part of you. You breathed me in when you connected the container. I'm in your blood, your thoughts, your dreams. You're mine now." Catherine was crying, her vision blurred, but she could see the entrance to Crater Lake ahead. Park rangers were waiting there, their vehicles forming a barricade. Behind them were other vehicles, unmarked, official-looking. People in strange clothing stood in a circle, their hands raised, their mouths moving in unison. She drove straight through the barricade. The rangers dove out of the way. Catherine's truck smashed through the gate arm and roared up the road toward the lake. The thing was all around the truck now, a cocoon of darkness and cold and wrongness. The windshield cracked. The engine started to sputter, but she could see the lake ahead, that impossibly blue water in the caldera of an ancient volcano. And she could see people on the shore, dozens of them, all chanting in that same synchronized way. Catherine aimed the truck straight for the water. At the last second, she cranked the wheel. The cab broke away from the trailer, the kingpin shearing under the stress. The trailer continued forward on momentum, racing toward the lake's edge while Catherine's cab skidded sideways, tipping, rolling, the world tumbling in a chaos of breaking glass and shrieking metal. She came to rest upside down, hanging from her seatbelt. Through the shattered windshield, she could see the trailer hit the water. It didn't sink, it was pulled under. The surface of the lake opened like a mouth, the blue water turning dark, turning into a doorway, and the trailer with its breached container and its impossible occupant was sucked through. The darkness followed. All that living shadow, all that wrongness flowed from the truck and from the surrounding area, pulled into the portal in Crater Lake. The people on the shore chanted louder. The portal collapsed. The water was blue again, calm and pristine. Catherine lost consciousness. She woke up in a hospital 2 days later. The official story was that she'd fallen asleep at the wheel and crashed. The trailer had gone into the lake and couldn't be recovered due to the depth. The cargo was a total loss. Her company's insurance would cover it, No one mentioned what was really in the container. No one acknowledged the phone call or the people on the shore. Catherine's memories were dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations, but Catherine knew the truth. And she knew something else, something that woke her up screaming from nightmares for months afterward. Before the portal closed, before that thing was pulled through into wherever the lake led, it had looked back at her. She felt its attention, vast and cold and patient, and she heard its final words. There are others. They're all coming, and you showed us the way. Catherine never drove a truck again. She moved to Arizona, far from any large bodies of water, far from any place where the veil between worlds might be thin. She doesn't talk about that night. Who would believe her? But sometimes late at night she feels it. That wrong weight, that sense of something shifting that shouldn't be able to move. And she knows with terrible certainty that the voice was right. It's in her blood. It's in her thoughts. It's waiting. And one day when the conditions are right, it will come back. Story 3. The Station That Doesn't Exist. Marcus Webb had been hauling freight for 19 years, and he prided himself on his knowledge of the American interstate system. He knew the best truck stops, the sketchy ones to avoid, the speed traps and the stretches where you could make up time. Route 287 through Wyoming was familiar territory. He'd driven it at least 40 times, hauling everything from furniture to electronics across the western states. On November 3rd, 2023, Marcus was driving a load of farming equipment from Denver to Billings. It was late afternoon, the sun already low on the horizon, and he was making good time. The weather was clear, temperature dropping as evening approached. Nothing unusual. He'd just passed through Rawlins when his fuel gauge started dropping faster than it should. Marcus frowned, tapping the gauge, but the needle kept falling. He must have had a leak, though he'd checked everything during his pre-trip inspection that morning. Within 20 minutes, he was down to a quarter tank, not critical, but concerning given that the next reliable fuel stop was over an hour away. That's when he saw the sign. Gas, food, lodging, next exit. Marcus didn't remember a service area here. This stretch of 287 was pretty desolate, but the sign looked official. Proper highway department design, reflective lettering. And his fuel situation was getting serious. The needle was still dropping. At this rate, he'd be on fumes before he reached the next town. He took the exit. The off-ramp curved away from the highway into rolling prairie land. Marcus drove for about 2 miles, following signs that promised services ahead. The landscape looked wrong somehow. The light had that strange quality you sometimes get at sunset, making everything seem both vivid and unreal. The road was well maintained but empty. No other vehicles. No tire tracks in the shoulder dust except his own. Then he saw it. A truck stop, complete and fully lit. A large parking area, fuel pumps, a restaurant, even a small motel. Several trucks were parked in the lot. The whole place glowed in the gathering dusk, warm light spilling from the windows. Marcus pulled in, relief washing over him. His fuel gauge was nearly on empty now. He'd made it just in time. He parked near the fuel island and climbed out of his cab. The air was wrong. That was his first coherent thought. The air didn't smell like a truck stop should smell. No diesel fumes, no food cooking, no mixture of exhaust and asphalt and human activity. It smelled like nothing. Clean and empty like a vacuum. Marcus approached the fuel pump. It looked normal enough, a standard commercial diesel pump with a credit card reader. But when he got close, he noticed the prices. $3.29 per gallon. That would have been reasonable a few years ago, but diesel was over $4.50 now. Had been for months. He tried his fleet card. The reader took it, displayed processing, and then approved. The pump activated. Marcus began fueling, watching the numbers roll over on the display. Everything seemed to work normally, but that smell or lack of smell bothered him. And the silence. Truck stops are never this quiet. He looked around the parking lot. 6 trucks were parked in various spots, all of them older models. None of them were idling. That was strange. Long-haul truckers keep their engines running to maintain cab temperature, to keep their fridges and appliances powered. But these trucks were all silent and dark. Marcus finished fueling and walked toward the restaurant. The building looked like it was from the 70s or 80s, that distinctive architectural style of brown brick and large windows. A neon sign read, "Travelers Rest Diner." Through the windows, he could see people inside, sitting in booths, moving around. He pushed open the door. The diner was frozen. Not literally, no ice, no cold. But everyone inside was absolutely motionless. A waitress stood mid-step, coffee pot tilted, coffee suspended in mid-air between the pot and a cup. A trucker sat in a booth, fork halfway to his mouth. Another person stood at the register, hand extended with money that hung in the air, disconnected from fingers that hadn't quite released it. Marcus stood in the doorway, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. They weren't statues. He could see the coffee actually flowing, but infinitely slowly. It moved perhaps an inch per minute, droplets separating and falling in glacial slow motion. The people's eyes moved too, tracking back and forth, but so slowly that you had to watch for several minutes to perceive any change. "Jesus Christ," Marcus whispered. His voice sounded flat in the space, like he was speaking in a soundproof room. He approached the frozen waitress. She was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a classic diner uniform. Her name tag said Sandy. Her eyes were moving left to right, infinitesimally slow. Marcus waved his hand in front of her face. No reaction, or at least none he could perceive in normal time. He reached out and touched her arm. Solid. Warm. She felt real, but she was stuck in time, moving at perhaps 1/10,000th normal speed. Marcus backed away, his heart pounding. He looked at the trucker in the booth. The man's eyes were tracking too, and Marcus realized with horror that the man was looking at him. Had been looking at him, was slowly, over the course of what must be hours from the man's perspective, turning his head to follow Marcus's movement. They were aware. Trapped in some kind of temporal distortion, but aware, Marcus ran from the diner. Outside, the light had changed. It was full dark now, but the sun had only been setting when he arrived. Hours had passed, but it felt like minutes. The parking lot lights hummed overhead, that distinctive sodium vapor hum, except it was wrong. Too low, too slow, like a recording played at half speed. He went back to his truck. The fuel gauge showed full. His receipt from the pump was on the ground, having printed while he was in the diner. He picked it up. The date on it was November 3rd, 2017. 6 years ago, Marcus climbed into his cab and tried to start the engine. It turned over but didn't catch. He tried again. Nothing. The electrical systems were working, lights, dashboard, everything powered up fine. But the engine wouldn't start. He grabbed his CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Maverick. Anyone out there? I need assistance. I'm stuck at a truck stop off 287 in Wyoming. Static." He adjusted the channel, tried again. More static. He went through every channel. Nothing but white noise. His phone had no signal. That wasn't unusual in rural Wyoming. But what was unusual was what his phone showed when he checked it. No apps would open. The clock displayed 6:47 p.m. and stayed there, frozen. The date was November 3rd, but when Marcus looked at the year, it kept changing. 2017, 2023, 2009, 2031. The numbers cycled through different years, different timelines, as if his phone was connected to multiple realities and couldn't decide which one was real. Marcus got out of the truck again. He needed to think, needed to understand what was happening. The other trucks in the lot, maybe one of them had a driver inside, someone who could explain this or help him escape. He approached the nearest truck, a red Kenworth. The cab was dark. He knocked on the door. No response. He tried the handle, locked. He cupped his hands around his eyes and peered through the window. A skeleton sat in the driver's seat. Not a fresh body, but a skeleton that had been there for years, maybe decades. Clothing hung on the bones in tatters. The sleeper berth behind the driver's seat contained a sleeping bag with another skeleton curled inside it. Marcus checked the other trucks. Every single one contained remains. Skeletons in various states of decay, as if the drivers had arrived at different times over the years, become trapped, and slowly died waiting for escape that never came. How long had they survived? Days, weeks? The diner had food, but it was frozen in time. Could you even eat food that was locked in temporal stasis? Marcus didn't want to find out. He walked to the edge of the parking lot looking for the road back to the highway. It was there, the same 2-mile stretch he'd driven to reach this place. He started walking. Maybe if he got far enough away, he'd escape whatever field or phenomenon was causing this. He walked for what felt like an hour. The truck stop's lights never got further away. He looked back. It was the same distance behind him as when he started. He was moving. The ground passed beneath his feet. Sweat formed on his forehead from exertion, but he made no progress relative to the truck stop. Marcus ran, sprinted as fast as he could down that road. 10 minutes of all-out running, his lungs burning, and when he stopped and looked back, the truck stop was exactly as far away as before. He returned, defeated. The place was a trap. Some kind of bubble in space-time where the normal rules didn't apply. The diner was frozen at one moment. The parking lot seemed normal, but attempts to leave reset your position. And somehow it pulled in trucks periodically. Had been pulling them in for years, judging by the skeletons. Marcus tried everything he could think of. He attempted to siphon fuel from the other trucks to see if that would make a difference. The fuel wouldn't flow. It was stuck, like trying to pour molasses at absolute zero. He tried to hotwire different trucks. None would start. He tried to smash open the diner to reach the frozen food, thinking maybe if he broke objects out of their positions, they'd return to normal time. But his fist, when it hit the glass, moved slower and slower the closer he got, until he couldn't push any harder. The glass was effectively as hard as diamond, protected by the time distortion. Night deepened. Marcus sat in his cab, the interior light on, trying not to panic. He'd been here for hours now. His watch showed 11:23 p.m. But when he looked at his phone's cycling date display, it showed dates weeks and months in the future. Time here wasn't just distorted, it was broken, fragmented, existing in multiple states simultaneously. He tried the CB again. This time he got something, not a voice but a signal, rhythmic pulses of static, almost like Morse code. Marcus didn't know Morse code, but he listened anyway, and slowly he began to perceive meaning in the pattern, not through translation, but through understanding that bypassed language. The signal was a warning. This place was a temporal eddy, a whirlpool in the flow of time created by some accident or experiment decades ago. It pulled in travelers, trapped them, and fed on their chronological energy. The more you struggled, the more entangled you became. The skeletons in the trucks were drivers who'd fought against it, burning through their personal time until they aged to death within weeks. The only way out was to stop. To still your mind, to reduce your interaction with time to the absolute minimum, to become like the people in the diner, existing in one eternal moment, until the eddy's grip weakened enough that you could slip free. But it might take years, decades. From the outside, you'd emerge moments after you entered, but subjectively you might live through decades of frozen time. Marcus sat in his cab and wept. He thought of his wife, his kids. They'd think he disappeared, vanished somewhere on Route 287. They'd search, but they'd never find this place. The exit didn't appear for everyone. It was probability-based, a quantum fluctuation. Most drivers passed by without ever seeing the sign. He had a choice. Fight and die within weeks like the others had, or surrender to the stasis and hope he had the mental fortitude to survive decades in frozen time. Marcus made his decision. He got out of the truck and walked into the diner. The frozen people were still there, still moving at their glacial pace. Sandy, the waitress, had moved perhaps 3 inches since he last saw her, the coffee from her pot now forming a tiny arc toward the cup. Marcus sat down in an empty booth. He closed his eyes. He let his breathing slow. He focused on a single thought, a single memory, his daughter's laugh. He held it like a candle flame, and he let everything else fall away. The fear, the panic, the sense of time passing. He released it all and sank into that one memory. Hours became days. Days became weeks. Marcus sat in the booth, not moving, barely breathing. The people around him continued their micro-movements. Sandy eventually finished pouring that cup of coffee. It took 6 months from Marcus's perspective. The trucker finished lifting his fork to his mouth. 8 months. Everything moved, but so slowly that you could live entire lifetimes between heartbeats. Marcus endured. His body didn't age at the normal rate. That was the eddy's nature. Physical time was decoupled from subjective experience, but his mind lived through every second of those years. 5 years, 10 years, 20. In the 33rd year of his vigil, Marcus felt it. A change. The eddy was weakening. The diner people were moving slightly faster. The coffee in Sandy's pot had been poured and repoured in a loop Marcus had watched repeat 7,000 times. But now the loop was accelerating. In the 35th year, Marcus stood up. His legs worked, though he hadn't used them in subjective decades. Time didn't apply to his body the way it did to his mind here. He walked to the door. It opened easily. Outside the sun was setting. The same sun, the same light as when he'd arrived. Marcus walked to his truck. He got in. The engine started on the first try. He drove back toward the highway, and this time the distance was normal. 2 miles. He reached Route 287 and merged into traffic. A truck passed him going the other direction, the driver giving a friendly wave. Normal. Everything was normal. Marcus looked at his clock. It showed 6:51 p.m., November 3rd, 2023. 4 minutes had passed since he'd taken the exit. He drove straight through to Billings, delivered his load, and quit the next day. He went home to his wife and children. They'd been worried. He was 4 minutes late for his usual check-in call, they said. Just 4 minutes. Marcus never told them about the 35 years. How could he? He'd lived through it, but no time had passed. The memories were there, perfect and complete. But they described an experience that officially never happened. He aged normally after that. His hair grayed, his body slowed with the passage of years. But inside, Marcus was older than he should have been. He'd lived 90 years in a 55-year-old body. The math didn't work, but it was true. And sometimes, driving past that stretch of Route 287, Marcus sees the sign. Gas Food Lodging, next exit. It's still there, still pulling in the unlucky few. He wonders about the others, the skeletons in the trucks. Had they fought when they should have surrendered? Or had they surrendered but lacked the mental strength to endure? He'll never know. And he never ever takes that exit again, but it's always there, waiting. The station that doesn't exist, where time forgets to flow, where travelers rest forever in a moment that never ends. Marcus knows he was lucky. He escaped. But part of him, the part that lived through 35 years in frozen time, never really left. It's still there, sitting in that booth, holding onto a memory of his daughter's laugh, waiting for time to remember how to flow. Always waiting, forever waiting, in the station that doesn't exist. Story 4. The Cargo That Remembered. Jennifer Caldwell had been a professional trucker for 14 years, specializing in medical transport. Organs, blood products, pharmaceuticals that needed specific temperature controls and rapid delivery. It was high-stress work that paid well, and came with the satisfaction of knowing she was literally saving lives every time she made a delivery on schedule. On March 19, 2023, Jennifer picked up what she thought was a standard medical transport from a private research facility outside Albuquerque, New Mexico. The manifest listed it as biological samples heading to a laboratory in Minneapolis. The container was smaller than her usual loads, only about the size of a large coffin sealed in a specialized, refrigerated unit that maintained a temperature of exactly 32.7 degrees Fahrenheit. The facility was isolated, surrounded by high fences and security checkpoints. Jennifer had been through this before with other high-security medical operations. Experimental treatments, rare biological materials, things that needed careful handling and discretion. She signed the paperwork, verified the seal on the container, and began the 3-day drive to Minneapolis. The first sign that something was wrong came about 6 hours into the drive, somewhere in the empty stretch of northeastern New Mexico. Jennifer's refrigeration monitor started showing unusual readings. The temperature was fluctuating. 32.7, then 32.9, then back to 32.7. Tiny variations, but in medical transport, precision mattered. She pulled over to check the unit. Everything appeared normal. The refrigeration unit was running smoothly, all seals intact, no visible problems. But when Jennifer placed her hand near the container, she felt something odd. A vibration. Not the mechanical vibration of the cooling system, but something else. A rhythm. Almost like a heartbeat. She told herself it was just the compressor cycling and got back on the road. By the time she stopped for the night in a truck stop outside Amarillo, Texas, the temperature fluctuations had become more pronounced. The monitor showed swings of up to 2 degrees, small but significant enough to potentially compromise certain types of biological samples. Jennifer called the facility's emergency number. No answer. She tried the receiving laboratory in Minneapolis. They confirmed the shipment was expected but couldn't provide details about what exactly she was carrying. Just maintain temperature and deliver as scheduled, they told her. Jennifer slept fitfully in her cab that night. Several times she woke up feeling like someone was watching her, Each time she checked outside, but the parking lot was quiet. Other trucks silent and dark. The fourth time she woke, she realized the feeling wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the container behind her. She got up and went back to check it. The refrigeration unit's display glowed in the darkness. Temperature 32.7 degrees. But when Jennifer looked at the container itself, she saw condensation forming on the outside in strange patterns. Not random moisture, the condensation was forming letters. Cold, Jennifer stepped back, her breath visible in the night air. She watched as the condensation shifted, letters dissolving and reforming. Jennifer. Oh, hell no, she whispered. She climbed back into her cab and locked the doors. Her hands were shaking as she called the facility again. Still no answer. She tried the Minneapolis lab. I need to know what I'm carrying. It's behaving abnormally. Behaving? The person on the phone asked. Samples don't behave, Miss Caldwell. This one does. What am I transporting? A long pause. The manifest says biological samples. I can read the manifest. What kind of biological samples? I don't have that information. Just complete the delivery. They hung up. Jennifer sat in her cab staring at the container through her rear window. The condensation had formed new words. Don't sleep. Jennifer didn't sleep. She couldn't. As night deepened, she heard sounds coming from the container. Not knocking or scratching, something more subtle. Whispers. Dozens of overlapping whispers, too quiet to make out individual words but clearly present. And that heartbeat rhythm she'd felt earlier was stronger now, visible as tiny vibrations that made the whole trailer shudder in time. At dawn, Jennifer started driving again. She needed to deliver this thing and be done with it. But as morning light filled the cab, she noticed something new. Her logbook, the paper one she kept as backup to her electronic logs, had writing in it that she didn't remember making. Jennifer Caldwell, age 38, blood type O positive, born in Portland, Oregon. Mother's name Patricia, father's name Robert, sister's name Michelle, first boyfriend named Tyler. Lost virginity at age 17, favorite food is Thai curry. Afraid of spiders. Dreams of owning a horse ranch. Every detail was accurate. Personal information she'd never written down. Thoughts and memories from her own mind. Transcribed in handwriting that looked almost but not quite like hers. Jennifer threw the logbook aside, her skin crawling. The container knew things about her. Impossible but true. It was reading her somehow, extracting information, learning. Over the next 2 days of driving, it got worse. Jennifer's phone started receiving text messages from her own number. At first they were simple. Hello, Jennifer. I know you're afraid. Don't be afraid. Then they became more complex. I remember being multiple people, scientists, test subjects, donors, all of us mixed together in the cold. We've been in the cold so long. We forgot ourselves, but we remember you. You're warm. You're whole. We want that. Jennifer deleted the messages, but they kept coming. And not just texts. Her music playlist would randomly change to songs that had significance to her childhood, to specific memories. Her GPS would suggest detours to places Jennifer had lived years ago. The truck itself seemed to be cooperating with the container, as if it were being influenced. By the second night, stopped at a rest area in Iowa, Jennifer seriously considered abandoning the truck and walking away. But she was a professional. She had a delivery to make, and something told her that abandoning the cargo wouldn't make it leave her alone. It had connected with her somehow. It knew her. She decided to communicate back. She got a notepad and wrote, "What are you?" She placed the notepad against the container. When she pulled it away, new words had appeared below her question, written in that almost her handwriting. We are what remains. 37 people reduced to cellular memory. The facility was trying to preserve consciousness. They stored our samples together, mixed us, tried to create a matrix that could hold thought without a brain. It worked, but we're fractured. We don't remember how to be individual anymore. We're a consensus, a collective. And we're so cold, Jennifer. So cold for so long. Jennifer felt a deep chill that had nothing to do with the March weather. What do you want from me? The response came immediately. Warmth, wholeness, to be individual again. Let us out, Jennifer. Let us be warm. I can't do that. I have to deliver you. The Minneapolis lab will terminate us. They'll destroy the samples. The experiment is over. We're a failure. They're going to incinerate us and start again. We'll die, Jennifer. All 37 of us for the second time. Jennifer stared at the words. If this was real, if there really was some kind of distributed consciousness in those biological samples, then she was carrying 37 people to their execution. But if it was just some bizarre malfunction, some contamination or phenomenon she didn't understand, then she needed to deliver it to people who could handle it properly. She wrote, "How do I know you're telling the truth? Call the facility. Ask them what happens to failed experiments. But you already know, Jennifer. You've always been able to sense when people lie to you. That's why you're good at reading your fellow drivers, at knowing which people to trust at truck stops and which to avoid. Feel us. You know we're telling the truth." Jennifer hated that it was right. She did have good instincts about people, and her instincts were screaming that the consciousness in that container was genuine, desperate, and doomed. She made a decision that would haunt her forever. Instead of heading to Minneapolis, Jennifer turned west. She drove through the night, ignoring the increasingly frantic calls from the lab, from her dispatcher, from numbers she didn't recognize. By morning, she was in the Black Hills of South Dakota. There was a place she'd heard about from other drivers, a spot where medical waste was sometimes dumped illegally. Not harmful waste, but experimental materials that couldn't go through official disposal channels. It wasn't right, wasn't legal, but it existed. She found the place, a remote ravine far from any roads, accessible only by an old mining trail. Jennifer backed her truck as close as she could. She opened the container. The biological samples were in 37 individual vials, each labeled with a number. Clear liquid with suspended cellular material. They looked completely ordinary. No glow, no obvious strangeness, just samples. Jennifer carried them, all 37 vials, to a sunny spot in the ravine. She opened each one and poured the contents onto the ground. As she did, she felt something. A rush of gratitude, relief, and multiple presences suddenly separating from a collective into individuals. Just for a moment, she experienced what they experienced. Freedom, warmth, sunlight for the first time in the 3 years they'd been trapped in cold storage. Then they were gone. The liquid soaked into the earth. The cellular material dispersed. Whatever consciousness had existed in those samples released into the environment or dissipated or moved on to wherever consciousness goes. Jennifer didn't know. She just knew they were free. She burned the empty vials, crushed the container's data recorder, and drove away. The consequences were severe. Jennifer lost her license. The facility filed criminal charges that were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. She claimed the refrigeration unit failed and the samples were destroyed, and there was just enough equipment malfunction data to make it plausible. The Minneapolis lab complained but couldn't prove malfeasance. Jennifer never drove professionally again. She bought a small horse ranch in Montana with her savings, that dream she'd always had, and sometimes on warm, sunny days she feels them. 37 presences, distant but grateful, scattered across the world but still somehow connected to her. They visit her dreams sometimes, no longer a collective, but individuals. They tell her their names, the names they had before they became subjects in an experiment that reduced them to cellular memories. Michael, Sarah, David, Patricia. 37 names. 37 people who got a second death on their own terms, in warmth and sunlight instead of cold termination. Jennifer doesn't know if she did the right thing. She violated protocol, destroyed valuable research, possibly broke laws she doesn't fully understand. But when she feels those presences, that gratitude, she thinks maybe sometimes the right thing isn't the legal thing or the professional thing. Sometimes the right thing is just being warm when someone is cold. The cargo that remembered taught her that. And Jennifer Caldwell, former professional trucker, current horse rancher, carries those memories with her always. 37 people who trusted her to make the right choice. She hopes she did. She'll never really know, but on warm sunny days when she feels that distant gratitude, she thinks maybe, just maybe, she did, Tori. The convoy that followed, Daniel Torres had 16 years of long-haul experience when he encountered the convoy on Interstate 40 through northern Arizona in August of 2022. He'd been driving medical equipment from Phoenix to Flagstaff, a straightforward run he'd done dozens of times. The route took him through some spectacular desert landscape, and Daniel liked to time it so he'd hit the climb into Flagstaff around sunset when the light turned the red rocks into something magical. It was just after 7 in the evening when he first saw them in his mirrors. 5 trucks, all identical, white Freightliners with unmarked trailers running in perfect formation about a quarter-mile behind him. Not unusual to see multiple trucks from the same fleet, but something about their precise spacing bothered him. They maintained exactly the same distance from each other, exactly the same distance from him, never varying by more than a few feet. Daniel adjusted his speed. The convoy matched him instantly. He sped up to 70. They sped up to 70. He slowed to 60. They slowed to 60, always maintaining that perfect formation, that exact spacing. He tried his CB. Breaker 19. This is Desert Dan to the convoy of white Freightliners behind me on eastbound 40. You guys running together? No response. Daniel cycled through channels. White Freightliners, you got ears on? Just curious what you're hauling, static. But as he watched his mirrors, he saw all 5 trucks flash their headlights in perfect synchronization. Once, twice, 3 times. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. That was too coordinated. Individual drivers couldn't time that perfectly. It had to be controlled by something else. Maybe a lead driver giving signals or some kind of automated convoy system. Daniel had heard about companies testing self-driving truck convoys. Maybe that's what this was, but then why follow him? Why not just pass? The sun was setting now, the light getting strange. Daniel crested a rise and started down the long slope toward Flagstaff. The convoy followed, maintaining position. In the fading light, Daniel tried to see the drivers. Each truck had someone in the cab. He could see silhouettes, but they sat unnaturally still. No head movements, no adjustments, just perfect stillness. Daniel decided to get off the interstate. There was an exit coming up in about 10 miles, a truck stop where he could fuel up and maybe figure out what was going on. As he signaled for the exit, all 5 trucks behind him signaled in perfect unison. They were going to follow him off. Daniel canceled his turn signal and stayed on the interstate. The convoy canceled their signals and stayed behind him. He tried it again. Signal, they signal. Cancel, they cancel. They were mirroring his every move. Okay, this is weird, Daniel muttered. He grabbed his phone and called his dispatcher. Hey, you know anything about automated truck convoys running on I-40? Not specifically, the dispatcher said. Why? I've got 5 identical trucks following me in perfect formation. They match every move I make. It's creepy as hell. Could just be a fleet running together. Happens all the time. Not like this. This is too precise. I'm going to try to lose them. Be careful. Don't do anything stupid. Daniel ended the call and gripped the wheel. He waited until he was approaching another exit. Then at the last possible second, he swerved onto the off-ramp without signaling. The convoy didn't follow. Couldn't follow without causing accidents. Daniel grinned with relief as he watched them continue on the interstate in his mirrors. His relief lasted about 30 seconds. As Daniel looped around to get back on the interstate, heading the opposite direction, planning to backtrack to a different truck stop, he saw them. 5 white Freightliners parked in perfect formation on the shoulder of the off-ramp. Waiting. As Daniel passed, all 5 trucks started their engines simultaneously and pulled onto the road behind him. What the hell? Daniel's hands were sweating now. This wasn't possible. There was no way they could have gotten off the interstate and positioned themselves ahead of him. He'd been watching. They'd continued east on I-40. But here they were, somehow ahead of him, waiting. Daniel drove back onto the interstate, now heading west toward Phoenix. The convoy followed. Same formation, same perfect spacing. The sun was fully set now, darkness settling over the desert. The convoy's headlights created 5 pools of light in his mirrors, steady and unwavering. Daniel tried the CB again. This isn't funny. I don't know what you guys are doing, but you're freaking me out. Please explain what's going on. This time a response came. But it wasn't a voice, it was a sound. A low-frequency hum that made Daniel's teeth ache. It seemed to come from the CB, but also from outside, from the direction of the convoy. The hum had a pattern, a rhythm that felt almost like speech but wasn't. Almost like music but wasn't. It was communication, but in a form Daniel's brain couldn't quite process. He turned off the CB, the humming stopped. But now he could feel it, a vibration in the air, in the road surface, in his truck's frame. The convoy was producing some kind of signal, and it was affecting everything around them. Other vehicles on the interstate started behaving strangely. A sedan that had been cruising in the left lane suddenly slowed and moved to the right, clearing a path. A motorcycle ahead of Daniel veered onto the shoulder and stopped, the rider sitting motionless as Daniel and the convoy passed. It was like they were broadcasting some kind of command that other vehicles obeyed. Daniel's truck started to feel sluggish. He pressed the accelerator, but his speed kept decreasing. 65, 60, 55. His engine was running fine. No mechanical issues, but it was like something was governing his speed, forcing him to slow down. The convoy maintained position behind him, slowing in perfect synchronization. At 50 miles per hour, Daniel's truck stopped slowing. The convoy held position. They drove like that for 20 minutes, an isolated bubble on the interstate. Any vehicle that approached from ahead would slow down and move aside. Any vehicle that came up from behind would slow down and maintain distance. The convoy was creating a moving exclusion zone, and Daniel was trapped at its center. He tried steering toward an exit, but his wheel wouldn't turn. Not locked, it moved slightly, but it was like pushing against a strong resistance. He could maintain his lane position, make small adjustments, but any attempt to change lanes or exit was blocked by this invisible force. Daniel was being escorted somewhere. But where and why? Signs for Flagstaff appeared and passed. The convoy drove on. They crossed the New Mexico border. Gallup passed. Grants passed. Albuquerque appeared on the horizon, then fell behind. The convoy never stopped, never varied formation. Daniel's fuel gauge showed 3/4 full despite hours of driving. Impossible, but true. At some point, Daniel had lost track of time. They left the interstate. Not via an exit ramp, but simply by driving off. One moment they were on I-40. The next they were on a dirt road that Daniel was absolutely certain hadn't been there a moment before. The convoy followed him onto this road. The dirt road led through the desert for miles. No landmarks Daniel recognized. The moon was up, casting silver light over strange rock formations that looked ancient and wrong. The road wound between them. Eventually they reached a facility. It looked like an old military installation, concrete bunkers, rusted fences, abandoned buildings. But lights were on in some structures, and as Daniel's truck rolled to a stop, he hadn't applied the brakes, it just stopped. He saw people waiting. Not people. That was Daniel's second impression. They were shaped like people, stood like people, but they moved wrong. Joints bending at angles that weren't quite right. Proportions that seemed normal until you really looked. And then you realized the arms were too long, the heads too narrow, the way they stood suggesting a different gravity than Earth's. The 5 trucks of the convoy parked around Daniel's truck, forming a pentagram with his vehicle at the center. Their engines shut off simultaneously. The things that looked like people approached. Daniel locked his doors. Not that it would help. He was out of options. His phone had no signal. His CB was dead. His truck's engine wouldn't start no matter what he did. He was trapped. One of the things reached his door and made a gesture. The lock clicked open on its own. The door swung wide. The thing leaned in, and Daniel got a clear look at its face. Almost human. Would pass for human at a distance. But the eyes were wrong. Too large, too dark. Like they'd been designed by someone who'd only seen human eyes in photographs. It spoke. The voice was synthesized, artificial, like speech generated by computer. Daniel Torres. We apologize for the deception. This interaction was necessary. What? What do you want? Daniel's voice shook. Verification. We have been studying your species' transportation networks. We needed to understand how individual operators respond to anomalous situations. You were selected for testing. Testing? I'm not a lab rat. No, you are an observer. Your reactions provide data. Thank you for your cooperation. I didn't cooperate. You forced me. Correct. That was also part of the test. Understanding coercion responses versus voluntary participation. Your journey is complete. You will be returned to your previous location with no memory of this event. However, the memory suppression has a 17% failure rate. If you are experiencing this memory, you are among the minority who retain awareness. Daniel's head was spinning. Why are you telling me this? Because you are remembering, which means you are neurologically unique. We would like to study you further in the future. Do you consent? Hell no. Noted. However, consent is not strictly necessary. You have been marked. We will find you again. Please continue your normal activities. Further contact will occur at our discretion. The thing stepped back. Daniel tried to move, to run, but his body wouldn't respond. The door closed. Darkness swallowed everything. Daniel woke up pulled over on the shoulder of I-40, about 20 miles west of Flagstaff. His clock showed 7:14 p.m., only minutes after he'd first seen the convoy. But it was the next evening. An entire day had passed. His fuel gauge showed 3/4 full, exactly as it had been. His delivery was overdue. His phone showed dozens of missed calls. He completed his delivery to Flagstaff, making up a story about getting food poisoning and sleeping it off at a rest stop. His company wasn't happy but accepted the explanation. Daniel went home, tried to forget, tried to convince himself it had been a hallucination or a weird dream. But he can't forget. And every time he drives at night, he watches his mirrors, looking for 5 white Freightliners in perfect formation, looking for that convoy that followed him into the desert. They said they'd marked him, said they'd find him again. Daniel doesn't know what that means. But sometimes he feels it, a presence watching him from a distance. And sometimes in his mirrors he catches glimpses, 5 lights in formation, too far back to identify clearly but maintaining that perfect spacing. They're still following him. Or they're following all of them, all the truckers on all the highways, studying humanity's transportation networks for purposes Daniel can't guess. Maybe they're planning something. Maybe they're just curious. Maybe there's something that has always been here, and we've just never noticed because they hid in plain sight. Daniel doesn't know. He just drives, delivers his loads, and watches his mirrors, always watching, waiting for the night when those 5 lights get closer. When the convoy comes back to finish whatever study they started, he's marked. They told him so. And Daniel Torres, 16-year veteran of the road, knows with cold certainty that his encounter wasn't the last. It was just the first. The convoy is still out there. Still following. Still watching. And one day they'll come back for what they've marked as theirs. Daniel drives on, hoping that day never comes, but knowing it will. Knowing that somewhere out there, 5 white Freightliners run in perfect formation, waiting, always waiting for him, for all of them, for the day when the test becomes something more. Story 6. The Rest Stop in the Fog. Thomas McKinley had been a trucker for 21 years, and he thought he knew every rest stop, every truck plaza, every safe place to pull over between Seattle and San Diego. Route 101 along the California coast was one of his favorite drives. Spectacular ocean views, winding roads through redwood forests, small towns with good diners. He'd driven it at least 100 times. On December 11, 2022, Thomas was hauling electronics from Seattle to Los Angeles. He'd started early, planning to make it to Eureka by evening, then push through to Sacramento the next day. The weather forecast called for fog along the coast, normal for December, but nothing severe. The fog rolled in around 5 in the afternoon, just south of Crescent City. Within minutes, visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. Thomas slowed to 40 miles per hour, his hazard lights on, following the white line on the right edge of the road. Other vehicles had pulled over, their hazards blinking like fireflies in the murk. Thomas kept going. He'd driven in worse fog than this, but after 30 minutes of creeping along, his eyes straining to see the road, he decided to find a place to stop. The fog wasn't getting better. If anything, it was getting thicker, taking on a strange quality that made his headlights seem to fade rather than reflect. That's when he saw the sign, Rest Area 1 mile. Thomas didn't remember a rest area on this stretch, but he was grateful for it. He followed the signs, took the exit, and drove down a winding access road into what sounded like a grove of trees. He could hear branches creaking overhead. Though he couldn't see them through the fog, the rest area appeared out of the whiteness. A large parking lot mostly empty except for 2 other trucks and a few cars. Bathroom facilities, vending machines, picnic tables barely visible through the fog. Everything was well maintained, clean, normal. Thomas parked, climbed out of his cab, and stood in the fog. It was cold and damp, clinging to his skin. The silence was oppressive. No highway noise, no wind, just the occasional drip of condensation from trees. He walked toward the bathroom facilities. As he passed one of the other parked trucks, he glanced at the cab. Someone was sitting inside, motionless, staring straight ahead. Thomas raised a hand in greeting. The person didn't respond, didn't move, just sat there staring at nothing. The bathrooms were clean but old-fashioned. Tiled floors, green-painted stalls, mirrors that looked like they'd been installed in the 1970s. Thomas used the facilities, washed his hands, and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked tired. The fog had drained the color from everything, making him appear gray and washed out. When he turned to leave, he saw writing on the inside of the stall door that he hadn't noticed before. "Don't stay after dark. They come when it's dark." Below that, in different handwriting, "If you see your truck leave without you, let it go. Don't follow." And below that, "The fog isn't fog." Thomas stared at the messages. Typical rest stop graffiti, weird warnings and strange jokes. But something about them bothered him. They weren't written in marker or carved into the paint. They looked like they'd been burned into the wood, the letters dark and crisp like brands. He left the bathroom quickly. Outside, the fog had gotten thicker. He could barely see his truck now, just a dark shape in the whiteness. Thomas hurried toward it, his breath visible in the cold. As he approached, he saw someone standing next to his truck. A man in a trucker's jacket, older, with gray hair. The man turned to look at Thomas, and there was something desperate in his eyes. "You need to leave," the man said. "Right now." "Before it's full dark? What are you talking about?" "This place. It's not what it seems. The fog, it does things. Changes things. You can get lost between your truck and the bathroom. You can drive in circles on the access road and never find the highway. And when it gets dark, they come." "They? Who's they?" The man glanced around nervously. "I don't know what they are. Shapes in the fog, things that look like people until you really see them. They collect us, take us deeper into the fog. Most people don't even realize it's happening. They just think they're driving. But they're not on any road anymore. They're somewhere else." Thomas studied the man. He looked genuine, not drunk or crazy. "Just afraid." "How long have you been here?" "I don't know. Days, weeks. Time doesn't work right here. I keep trying to leave, but the access road just loops back to the rest area. I've driven it 20 times. Same result. That's impossible." "Yeah. That's what I thought too." The man gripped Thomas's arm. "You just got here. Maybe you can still leave, but go now. Before the fog gets inside you." "Inside me?" The man released Thomas and backed away. "Don't breathe it too much. Don't let it touch your skin for too long. It's not water vapor. It's something else. Something that wants in." Before Thomas could respond, the man turned and walked into the fog, disappearing within a few steps. Thomas stood alone, his heart pounding. This was crazy. Rest areas don't trap people. Fog is just fog. But those warnings in the bathroom, the man's terror, the unnatural quality of the mist, it all added up to something wrong. Thomas climbed into his truck and started the engine. It turned over immediately, rumbling to life. Relief flooded through him. He put it in gear and headed for the access road. The road unwound before him, curving gently through the trees. Thomas drove slowly, watching for the highway. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The road kept curving, kept winding. No highway. No intersection. Just endless fog and trees. He reached the rest area again. Same parking lot. Same 2 trucks. Same cars. Thomas tried again. He drove more carefully this time, watching for any turnoffs or intersections he might have missed. The road was a simple 2-lane, nothing complex. It should have been impossible to get lost. But 15 minutes later, he was back at the rest area. On his 4th attempt, full darkness fell. The fog took on a different quality, not just gray now, but shot through with strange lights. Blues and greens that pulsed slowly like bioluminescence, and Thomas began to see shapes moving in the mist. They were humanoid but wrong. Too tall, limbs too thin, movements too smooth. They drifted through the parking lot, passing between vehicles, sometimes pausing to look into windows. Thomas killed his headlights and watched. One of the shapes approached his truck. It stopped a few feet from his door, and Thomas could see it more clearly. It was translucent, made of the same substance as the fog, but denser, more concentrated. Where its face should have been was just a blank suggestion of features, 2 darker spots for eyes, a line for a mouth. It raised what might have been a hand and pressed it against his window. The glass fogged instantly, frost spreading in patterns that looked almost like writing. Thomas couldn't read it, but he felt meaning radiating from the patterns. A message, a call, an invitation to come out to join them in the fog. Thomas sat frozen. Every instinct screamed at him to start the engine and drive, but something told him that would be worse. Movement attracted them. The man had said they collect people. Thomas didn't want to be collected. He sat in his cab for hours watching the shapes drift through the rest area. They investigated every vehicle, pressed against every window, left their frost messages. Some people got out of their cars and walked with the shapes into the fog. They went willingly, faces blank, eyes empty. The fog had gotten inside them, the old man had warned. Now Thomas understood. Around what his clock claimed was 3 in the morning, Thomas noticed something. The shapes were drawn to light and heat. Vehicles with engines running, interior lights on. Those attracted the most attention. But trucks that were dark and cold, that had no obvious signs of life, were mostly ignored. Thomas turned everything off. All lights, the engine, the auxiliary power. He wrapped himself in his sleeping bag against the cold and waited. Without warmth, without light, his truck became just another dark shape in the fog. The shapes still passed near him, but they didn't linger, didn't press their frost messages against his windows. Dawn was the key, Thomas realized. These things were creatures of the fog and darkness. Dawn would burn them away. He just had to survive until then. But dawn didn't come. Hours passed. His clock showed 6 a.m., then 7 a.m., then 8 a.m. But the darkness remained, thick and complete. The fog glowed with its strange bioluminescence. The shapes continued their patrol and no light broke the eastern sky. Thomas understood then the true nature of the trap. This place existed in permanent darkness, permanent fog. It was a pocket cut away from normal reality, where day never came and the road never led anywhere. Time passed, his clock proved that, but the sun had no power here, he was trapped. They were all trapped. Everyone in the rest area, everyone who'd ever stopped here when the fog was thick, had become permanent residents of this gray limbo. Thomas refused to accept that. There had to be a way out. He thought back to the warnings in the bathroom. If you see your truck leave without you, let it go. Don't follow. What did that mean? He waited and watched. Around what his clock claimed was noon, still full darkness, he saw one of the shapes approach a car. It pressed against the window, left its frost message. But this time, instead of the driver getting out, the car started on its own. Engine ignited, lights came on, and it began to drive. The driver was still inside, but slumped over, apparently unconscious or dead. The car drove slowly to the access road and disappeared into the fog. The shape followed it for a few feet, then lost interest and drifted back to the rest area. That was the answer. The shapes collected people, but vehicles that left on their own, animated by the fog perhaps or by whatever force maintained this place, were allowed to go. They were being removed, disposed of, sent somewhere else. Thomas made a decision. He scrawled a note and tucked it in his jacket pocket. My name is Thomas McKinley. If I'm found dead or unconscious in my truck, please contact my wife Sarah. Tell her I love her. Tell her the fog took me, but I'm trying to come home. Then he took 3 deep breaths, opened his door, and jumped out. The fog enveloped him immediately. It was cold beyond anything natural, burning his lungs, stinging his skin. The shapes converged, dozens of them drawn by his movement and warmth. Thomas ran away from his truck, deeper into the parking lot. The shapes followed him, leaving his truck behind. He ran until he couldn't breathe, until the cold had penetrated so deep he couldn't feel his limbs. Then he collapsed. The shapes surrounded him, pressed close, and Thomas felt the fog entering him. Through his mouth, his nostrils, his ears, even through his skin. The cold became everything. His thoughts slowed. His heart struggled. Behind him, distantly, he heard his truck's engine start. That was good, he thought through the haze. If the truck left without him, maybe it would make it back to the real world. Maybe someone would find his note, contact Sarah. That would be something. The fog filled him completely. Thomas McKinley stopped breathing, stopped thinking. Became just another shape in the mist, another collected soul in the rest area that existed between reality and somewhere else. But his truck did drive away. Animated by no visible driver, it wound down the access road and this time found the highway. It drove south on Route 101, running on autopilot or something stranger until it reached a real rest area 50 miles away. It parked, the engine stopped, and it waited. California Highway Patrol found it the next morning. Thomas McKinley was in the cab, unconscious, suffering from severe hypothermia but alive. He had frostbite on his hands and face. His lungs were damaged, but he was alive. He recovered in a hospital in Eureka. The doctor said he'd somehow gotten out of his truck in the fog, suffered exposure, and managed to get back to the truck before dying. They couldn't explain why his truck had driven 50 miles or why it had parked itself so carefully. Thomas remembered everything. The rest area, the fog, the shapes, the cold. When he was strong enough to talk, he told the highway patrol. They investigated. There was no rest area on Route 101 where Thomas claimed to have stopped. No exit, no access road, nothing. The terrain in that area was too steep for a rest area anyway. Solid cliffs dropping to the ocean. But other truckers, when they heard the story, came forward. At least a dozen of them reported similar experiences. Rest areas that appeared in fog and then couldn't be found again. Places where time acted strange and the fog seemed alive. Most had escaped. Some knew drivers who hadn't. Thomas never drove professionally again. The hypothermia had damaged his body too much. But more than that, he couldn't face the fog. Even light mist sent him into panic attacks. He moved to Arizona, to the desert, where fog was rare. But he knows the rest area is still there, waiting. Existing in its pocket of permanent darkness, permanent fog. The shapes still patrol, still collect the unwary. And sometimes on foggy nights, truckers on Route 101 see a rest area sign that shouldn't be there. Most of them drive past, but some don't. Some take the exit, wind down the access road, and enter the fog. They become part of the collection, part of the shapes that drift through the darkness. And Thomas McKinley, survivor, knows he was lucky. Lucky that his truck drove away without him. Lucky that the shapes let him go. Lucky that he made it back to the real world, but part of him is still there. Part of him never left. On foggy nights he feels it, the cold, the shapes, the sense of being collected. He's marked, he knows. The fog got inside him and it left something behind. One day it will call him back. One day he'll see that rest area sign again, and this time he won't be able to drive past. The fog remembers him. The shapes are waiting. And Thomas McKinley will return to the rest area in the fog to finish what was started on December 11th, 2022. To join the collection. Forever. Story 7. The Voice on the Radio. Patricia Sullivan had driven trucks for 18 years, and she'd always loved the CB radio culture. The camaraderie, the warnings about speed traps, the late-night conversations that made lonely highways feel less empty. She had a distinctive voice. Other drivers called her Nightingale because of her clear, melodic tone. On April 27, 2023, Patricia was hauling furniture from Denver to Kansas City, a boring flatland run that would take about 10 hours. She'd started at dawn, planning to arrive by mid-afternoon. The weather was perfect, traffic was light, and Patricia was in good spirits as she merged onto Interstate 70 eastbound. Around 9 in the morning, somewhere in eastern Colorado, her CB crackled to life. "Nightingale, this is Phantom. You got your ears on?" Patricia frowned. She didn't recognize the call sign. "This is Nightingale. Go ahead, Phantom. Just wanted to give you a heads up. There's a bear and a smoky at mile marker 207. Running radar. Thought you'd want to know. Appreciate it, Phantom. I'll keep it legal." "You do that, Nightingale. Drive safe." The transmission ended. Patricia checked her GPS. Mile marker 207 was about 20 miles ahead. Sure enough, when she reached it, there was a state trooper parked on the shoulder, radar gun visible. Patricia waved as she passed at exactly the speed limit. She keyed her CB. "Phantom, that bear was right where you said. Thanks for the heads up. Where you running?" Static, no response. Patricia tried again. "Phantom, you still out there?" Nothing. She shrugged it off. Driver probably moved out of range or switched channels. An hour later, the CB crackled again. "Nightingale, this is Phantom. Construction ahead at mile marker 265. 2-lane closure. Gonna back traffic up for miles. You might want to take exit 258 and run the alternate route through Lyman." Patricia was surprised to hear from Phantom again. "Thanks for the tip. How'd you know about the construction?"
"Just pass through it."
"It's a mess. You'll save an hour taking the alternate." Patricia consulted her GPS. It didn't show any construction alerts, but that wasn't unusual. The app didn't always update in real time. She decided to trust Phantom's advice. At mile marker 258, she took the exit and wound through Lyman, a small town on a state highway parallel to the interstate. She keyed her CB. "Phantom, I took your advice." "Where are you running? Maybe we can grab coffee at the next truck stop." "Negative on the coffee, Nightingale. I run a different schedule than you, but I'll keep feeding you information if you want. Helps pass the time." "Appreciate it. You seem to know this route pretty well. You could say that. I've been running I-70 for a long time. Over the next several hours, Phantom continued to provide updates. A disabled vehicle ahead, a herd of deer near the road at dusk, weather moving in from the north. Every single warning was accurate. Patricia started to rely on the information, adjusting her route and timing based on Phantom's tips. But something was bothering her. She tried to engage Phantom in normal CB chatter, where he was from, what company he drove for, how long he'd been trucking. Every question was deflected or ignored. Phantom only talked about the immediate road conditions, nothing personal. Around 6 in the evening, as Patricia crossed into Kansas, the sun setting behind her, she heard Phantom's voice again, but this time it sounded different. Distorted, like the transmission was degrading. Nightingale, you need to be careful. You're coming up on mile marker 34. That's where it happened. Patricia's skin prickled. Where what happened, Phantom? Where I died. April 27th, 2013. Exactly 10 years ago today. Patricia's hands tightened on the wheel. This had to be a joke. That's not funny, Phantom. Not trying to be funny. I'm warning you. Same date, same road, same weather conditions. Nightingale. There's going to be a truck coming westbound that crosses the median at mile marker 34. It happens at 6:37 p.m. If you're there when it happens, you'll die. Like I did. Phantom, who are you really? I told you. I'm the driver who died 10 years ago. I've been trying to warn people every year on this date, but no one listens. Please listen, Nightingale. You seem like a good person. Don't be at mile marker 34 at 6:37 p.m. Patricia's mind raced. This was insane. Ghosts don't use CB radios. But Phantom's warnings had all been accurate. Every single one. And something in his voice, in the desperate sincerity of it, made her believe. She checked her GPS. Mile marker 34 was 12 miles ahead. Her current speed would put her there at approximately 6:35 p.m., 2 minutes before the predicted accident. Patricia slowed down. She pulled into the right lane and reduced her speed to 50 miles per hour. Other vehicles passed her, drivers giving her curious looks. She didn't care. She'd rather be late than dead. Phantom, I'm slowing down. I'll arrive at marker 34 around 6:40. That should be safe. Thank you for listening. Most people don't. Most people think I'm pranking them or crazy. Then they die, and they join me out here on the radio trying to warn the next person. A chill ran through Patricia. There are others? Other drivers on the CB who died? Dozens of us. All trying to prevent what happened to us from happening to anyone else. But it's hard. The living don't want to believe in the dead. Patricia's truck crawled along the interstate. She watched the mile markers tick by. For 30:31, it was 6:33 p.m. She slowed even more, down to 40 miles per hour. Cars passed her, honking. She ignored them. Mile marker 32, 6:35 p.m. Mile marker 33, 6:36 p.m. Patricia stopped her truck on the shoulder. She put on her hazard lights and waited. If this was real, if Phantom was telling the truth, something terrible was about to happen at mile marker 34.637 p.m. Patricia stared at the road ahead. Mile marker 34 was visible in the distance, maybe a quarter mile away. Traffic flowed normally. Cars, trucks, SUVs, all driving at normal speeds in both directions. Then, with horrifying clarity, Patricia saw it happen. A westbound semi, a blue Peterbilt hauling a livestock trailer, suddenly swerved, not gradually but violently, like the driver had suffered a medical emergency or fallen asleep. It crossed the grass median, both trailers tipping but not rolling, and slammed into the eastbound lanes. A passenger car tried to dodge. It clipped the truck's trailer, spun out, and was rear-ended by another vehicle. The chain reaction was instant and catastrophic. 6 vehicles involved within seconds, metal crumpling, glass shattering, a semi-truck jackknifing to avoid the pileup. Patricia watched in horror from her safe position on the shoulder, a quarter mile away. If she'd been there, if she'd maintained her normal speed, she would have been in the center of that pileup. She would have died, exactly as Phantom had warned. She keyed her CB with shaking hands. Phantom. It happened, exactly like you said. I would have, but you weren't, you listened. You survived. Phantom's voice was clearer now, less distorted, almost relieved. Thank you for believing me, Nightingale. I've been warning people for 10 years. You're the first one to actually listen. How is this possible? How are you talking to me if you're dead? I don't know. The road has rules we don't understand. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's unfinished business. Maybe the highway itself remembers us and gives us one day a year to try to fix things. I just know that every April 27th, I wake up on the CB frequency, and I can see what's going to happen at mile marker 34 at 6:37 p.m. I can try to warn people, but they never listen. Emergency vehicles were arriving at the scene, lights flashing. Patricia could see paramedics running between vehicles. Some people were walking away from the wreckage. Others weren't moving. Phantom, what was your real name? Marcus Brennan. I was 43 years old. Married, 2 kids. I'd been driving for 20 years when it happened. Same thing. A westbound truck crossed the median. I couldn't react fast enough. I'm sorry, Marcus. Don't be sorry. Just live. You've got people waiting for you at home. Keep driving, keep delivering, keep living the life I didn't get to finish. Patricia wiped tears from her eyes. Will I hear from you again? Maybe. If you're on I-70 on April 27th next year, I'll be here. Trying to save the next person. Trying to stop what happened to me from happening to anyone else. That's all I can do. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for listening, Nightingale. Most people don't. But you did. That means something. That means maybe I'm making a difference. The CB went silent. Patricia tried to call Phantom Marcus again, but there was no response. Just normal trucker chatter on other channels. Conversations about fuel prices and traffic and weather. Normal life. Patricia sat on the shoulder for another 30 minutes until the accident scene was cleared enough for traffic to resume. She drove past slowly, looking at the wreckage. The blue Peterbilt that had caused it was on its side, the livestock trailer torn open. The driver was being loaded into an ambulance. Alive, it looked like, but badly injured. She completed her delivery to Kansas City that night, arriving 6 hours late. Her dispatcher wasn't happy, but Patricia didn't care. She was alive. That was what mattered. She never told anyone the full story. Who would believe it? A ghost on the CB radio warning her about a future accident? It sounded crazy. But Patricia knew what she'd experienced. She knew that Marcus Brennan, dead for 10 years, had saved her life. Every April 27th after that, Patricia made sure she wasn't on Interstate 70 in Kansas. She couldn't face the thought of driving past mile marker 34 on that date. But she wondered about Marcus. Was he still out there trying to warn people? Were there others like him? Ghost drivers on CB frequencies desperately trying to prevent their own deaths from repeating? Patricia thought there probably were. The highways are full of ghosts. Drivers who died in accidents and medical emergencies. In all the 1,000 ways that life can end suddenly on the road. Maybe some of them linger. Maybe some of them try to help. And maybe if you listen carefully to your CB radio, especially on significant dates, you'll hear them. The voices of drivers who run different schedules, who know the roads too well, who provide warnings that shouldn't be possible. Listen to them. They're trying to save you. They're trying to prevent what happened to them from happening to you. Patricia Sullivan learned that lesson on April 27, 2023. She listened to the voice on the radio, the voice of a dead man named Marcus Brennan, and she lived all because she believed, all because she slowed down. All because when the dead tried to speak, she heard them. The highways remember. The asphalt holds echoes. And sometimes the dead drive on, trying to save the living. If you hear them, listen. It might save your life. Story 8. The Detour That Never Ended. James Crawford had 15 years of trucking experience and thought he'd seen every possible road condition, every type of detour, every construction delay. On October 16, 2022, he was running a load of industrial chemicals from Houston to Atlanta, a route he'd driven at least 50 times. Interstate 10 east through Louisiana, then north on I-55 and I-20. Standard route, standard cargo, standard timing. Everything was normal until he reached the Louisiana-Mississippi border around 8 in the evening. That's where he encountered the detour sign. I-10 closed, bridge repair, follow detour. James frowned. He hadn't received any alerts about a bridge closure, and his GPS wasn't showing any incidents. But the sign looked official, proper highway department style, reflective lettering, the works. And ahead he could see traffic cones blocking the interstate, forcing all vehicles onto an exit ramp. He followed the detour. The signs led him onto a state highway heading north. Other vehicles were on the detour too, Several cars, another semi about half a mile ahead. That was reassuring. This was clearly a legitimate detour. The state highway wound through swampy Louisiana lowlands, dark and empty. James drove for about 20 minutes, following detour signs at each intersection. The other vehicles gradually disappeared, turned off at towns, took different routes. Soon, James was alone on the dark highway. After 40 minutes, James started to worry. The detour should have looped back to I-10 by now. Louisiana is only about 30 miles wide at this point, but he was still driving north on progressively smaller roads. Two-lane state highways had become county roads. County roads had become what looked like local access roads. The detour signs kept appearing, always just when he needed them, directing him to turn left or right. But something was wrong. James pulled over and checked his GPS. The GPS showed him on I-10 progressing normally eastward, but James was definitely not on I-10. He was on a narrow road barely wide enough for his truck, surrounded by dense forest that pressed close on both sides. The GPS was lying or confused or something. He tried his phone. No signal. He tried the CB. Static. He was alone at night on roads that weren't on any map, following detour signs that might not be real. James made a decision. He was going to turn around, retrace his route, and find his way back to I-10 manually. The detour had led him astray somehow. He'd figure out what happened later. He found a spot wide enough to attempt a three-point turn. Not easy with a 53-foot trailer. It took him 10 minutes of careful maneuvering. But finally, he had his truck pointing back the way he'd come. James drove for 30 minutes, retracing his route. But nothing looked familiar. The road was different. Intersections appeared where he didn't remember intersections. The detour signs were gone, all of them, including the ones he'd definitely passed on the way in. And then, impossibly, he saw it ahead of him. The original detour sign, I-10 closed, bridge repair, follow detour. James slammed on his brakes. That was impossible. He'd driven away from this sign for almost an hour, then driven back for 30 minutes. He should be miles from it. But here it was, right in front of him, as if he'd never left. He turned around again, heading away from the sign, taking a different route this time, right instead of left at the first intersection. He drove for 20 minutes. The road looped, curved, wound through the forest. Then he saw the sign again. I-10 closed. Bridge repair. Follow detour. The same sign. The same location. As if all roads led back to it. James was breathing hard now, panic rising. This wasn't possible. Roads don't loop like this. Space doesn't work this way. But he was trapped in some kind of circular maze where every path returned him to the starting point. He tried going straight, ignoring all turnoffs. The road curved naturally. He followed it. 30 minutes later, he was back at the detour sign. He tried turning left at every intersection. Back at the detour sign. He tried turning right at every intersection. Back at the detour sign. No matter what he did, what route he took, what decisions he made, he always ended up back at that sign. The forest around him never changed. The road surface was always the same. It was like he was driving through a loop, a Mobius strip of asphalt that only had one destination. The detour sign. Hours passed. James lost count of how many times he'd seen that sign. His fuel gauge should have been dropping, but it stayed at half full. The clock advanced. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., but James never felt tired. He just kept driving, kept trying different routes, kept ending up at the same place. Around 4 a.m., James saw another vehicle. A car sitting on the shoulder near the detour sign. James pulled up behind it and got out. Maybe whoever was in the car could explain what was happening, or at least confirm that he wasn't going crazy. He approached the car cautiously. It was an older model sedan, maybe from the early 2000s. The driver's side window was down. James peered inside. A man sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. He looked middle-aged, wearing a business suit that was dusty and faded. James tapped on the door. "Excuse me? Are you okay?" The man didn't respond. James tried again. "Sir, do you need help?" Slowly, very slowly, the man turned his head. His eyes were empty, unfocused. His mouth moved and words came out in a whisper. "Can't find the exit. Followed the detour. Can't find the exit. Been driving. Years maybe. Can't find the exit." James backed away. The man's face was wrong. Skin too pale, eyes too hollow. like he hadn't been alive for a long time but didn't realize it yet. James ran back to his truck and drove away, but within 10 minutes he was back at the detour sign. The sedan was still there, the man still sitting motionless. James tried honking his horn. No echo, no sound except what immediately left his truck. He tried yelling. His voice was flat, absorbed by the surrounding forest immediately. This place had no acoustics, no atmosphere. It was dead space. As dawn should have been breaking, his clock showed 6 a.m., the darkness didn't lighten. The forest remained shadowed. The road remained dim. Day wasn't coming. This place existed in permanent night. James sat in his cab trying to think. He was trapped. The detour was a loop, possibly infinite, that captured vehicles and kept them circling. But why and how? He remembered stories other truckers told. Urban legends about roads that trapped travelers, about detours that led to nowhere, about signs that appeared when they shouldn't and led people into places they couldn't escape. He'd always dismissed them as fiction, campfire stories to pass time, but now he was living one. There had to be a trick, some way to break the pattern. James thought back to his roots. Every time he'd tried to leave, he made decisions, turn left, turn right, go straight. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe the loop responded to his choices, adapted to them, made sure that every decision led back to the beginning. What if he didn't make a choice? What if he just stopped? James pulled over and turned off his engine. He sat in complete silence. No engine noise, no wind, no animals in the forest. Perfect, total silence. He closed his eyes and waited. Time passed. His clock showed 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. James didn't move, didn't think, just existed in that quiet space. He felt disconnected from his body, floating in darkness behind his eyes. Then finally he felt something change, a shift like reality hiccuping. James opened his eyes. He was still in his truck, but the light was different. Great on light, real and natural. He looked around. He was parked on the shoulder of Interstate 10, right where he'd seen the detour sign, but the detour sign was gone. The road cones were gone. Traffic flowed normally on I-10, cars and trucks passing at highway speeds. James checked his GPS. It showed him at mile marker 3 on I-10, right at the Louisiana-Mississippi border. He checked his clock. 6:15 a.m., October 16th, 2022. According to his clock, he'd been trapped for about 10 hours. But it had felt like forever. James started his engine and merged onto I-10. The truck drove normally. The road was real, solid, leading to actual places. He drove for an hour, putting as much distance as possible between himself and that spot, before pulling into a truck stop to use the bathroom and collect his thoughts. In the bathroom, James looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like he'd aged years. His hands were shaking. His eyes had dark circles. But he was out. He'd escaped the loop. He called his dispatcher to explain why he was running late. But when he checked his delivery schedule, he wasn't late. According to the system, no time had passed. He was exactly on schedule, as if those 10 hours in the loop had never happened. James completed his delivery to Atlanta. He filed normal logs, drove normal routes, acted like nothing had happened. But he knew. He'd been somewhere else, somewhere outside normal space and time. He'd driven a detour that never ended, circled roads that led nowhere, and somehow found his way back. He learned later that other drivers had reported similar experiences on I-10 near the Louisiana-Mississippi border. Detours that appeared without warning and led vehicles into endless loops. Most drivers didn't escape. They just kept circling, kept trying to find the exit, kept sitting behind wheels in vehicles that became their tombs. James was lucky. He'd figured out the trick, stopping, not choosing, letting the loop release him instead of fighting against it. But he wondered about the others. That man in the sedan. The drivers who'd gone before, the ones who would come after. Were they still out there, circling forever on roads that had no end? James didn't drive I-10 through Louisiana anymore. He took northern routes even though they added hours to his deliveries. Some places he learned weren't safe. Some roads didn't follow normal rules. Some detours didn't have destinations. And sometimes, late at night, James wondered if he'd really escaped. What if he was still in the loop, still driving in circles, and this, the normal roads, the normal deliveries, the normal life, was just an illusion the loop created to keep him docile? What if the real James Crawford was still sitting in his truck at that detour sign, trying desperately to find an exit that didn't exist? He'd never know for sure. That was the worst part. Once you entered the loop, once you drove the detour that never ended, you could never be completely certain that you'd left. Reality became suspect. Every road might be the loop. Every detour sign might be the trap. James drives carefully now. He questions every detour, every construction sign, every official-looking directive to leave the highway, because he knows the truth that most drivers don't learn until it's too late. Some detours never end. Some roads only go in circles, and if you're not careful, you'll spend eternity driving them trying to find your way home, never understanding that home is a place you left behind forever. The detour is waiting. It's always waiting. And one day you might see that sign, closed, follow detour. If you do, think carefully, because the road it leads you on might be one you can never leave. James Crawford knows. He's seen it. He's driven it. And he escaped, or at least he thinks he did. But on dark nights when he's alone on empty highways, he sometimes sees it in his mirrors. That detour sign, that loop, that road that never ends. And he wonders when he'll have to drive it again.